So first, welcome to the Club Officer Training elective session on DTM projects. I've assembled a panel of 3 pathways DTMs, although in full disclosure, I only see 2 of them currently here. I have Jay Karthik and Audrey Cretion, and also I'm hoping Trevor Crippen will show up pretty soon. He's supposed to be on this as well, so hopefully we'll get him. But anyways, they will talk about their experiences selecting and executing their Pathways DTM projects and answer whatever questions you might have. And if you guys don't have enough questions, I have my own list of questions. So we'll see how that goes. They probably prefer your questions to my questions. So why are we doing this? The district decided to run these sessions in the hope of removing some of the impediments to completing a DTM project, which, as you might know, for many people, is the biggest challenge to becoming a DTM. Completing the paths is easy. Getting your mind around a DTM project, that seems to be what people struggle with. We've already had one of the COTs focused on doing DTM projects. That was back in November. We did one on lessons learned sessions in December. If you want additional assistance after this session, if you go to the District 31 website, district31.org, you'll see there's a thumbnail that's called Pathways DTM Toolkit. If you access it, you'll see questionnaires that were filled out by the Pathways DTMs who completed the survey, and I think I got all but 2 of the people who have Pathways DTMs to fill out the surveys. You'll also find the COT sessions that have already occurred. You'll see interviews with 8 of the Pathways DTMs. I'm going to be adding a 9th soon. So all sorts of information where people talk about their projects and kind of give you a sense about how you execute a project, what might make sense for a project, and so forth. And it also gives you access to their contact information, and they all indicated a willingness to take not always phone calls, but emails from you with questions you might have, and to at least engage with you a little bit to help you figure out what to do. So just in terms of ground rules, if at any point during the session you have a question or comment, if you can raise your virtual hand, and if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see reactions, which gives you the ability to do it, or raise a physical hand, just something that I can see, and I will call on you as soon as there's a break in the action. And with that, I'm going to ask my panelists, the 2 that I have now, to introduce themselves, maybe with a sentence or 2 about their projects. And I'll call on Audrey first.
Thank you, David. Good evening, everyone. My name is Audrey Cretion. What was my DTM project? I did a toy drive. Never, ever have I done a toy drive. No clue how to do it, but I wanted to pick something that would challenge me and that I would learn. My project was a toy drive for the Children's Hospital in Providence, and there is a backstory of why I picked that, but I'll save that till later. Back to you, David.
And back to you, Jay.
Awesome. First of all, thanks, David. Thanks, District 31, for having me here. And so nice to see so many of you all attend this session. This just tells me that you're all trying to embark on the journey of being a DTM. And I'll tell you all what, the journey, it is as interesting and fruitful, sometimes more than even the destination. Sometimes I know I go on this journey to, let's say, this Mount Monadnock, and when I reach the summit, it's just nothing but a piece of rock. And I realized, wow, I took all this effort to just come to this rock. No, I actually enjoy the journey. So the DTM journey, I think, is what you're all going to like. And my project was all about bringing Toastmasters to folks that were visually impaired, blind. I partnered with 2 or 3 federations, like the National Federation for the Blind, the Carroll School, Perkins School, and pretty much ran some demo meetings for them. And we got a member or 2 out of that. And now before I hand control back to David, I'm a member of Boston West Toastmasters, as well as the Watertown Saturday Toastmasters. David?
Thank you, Jay. I heard Boston West Toastmasters is the finest Toastmasters club in the district. Have you heard the same thing? I was curious. And I'm guessing, David Zhang, have you heard the same thing as well? Okay.
I was absolutely many times.
Very good. So before I get into the questions, just to kind of level set, by a show of hands, how many of you are about to start a DTM project? Are you at that point? How many of you? Oh, okay. I see one with, oh, Stefano, you already have 5 of them, don't you? Or a few. And how many, oh, just one? Okay. And how many are you attending because it's somewhere in the future, but you still want to start your thinking on it so you'll be ready to do it when it's time? Okay, that's great. So you're the core that this is kind of set for, so that'll be terrific. And I see a bunch of virtual hands on that as well. So let me start with a question that I'll throw out not just to Audrey and Jay, but to everyone. If anybody would like to share their perspective about what they think might make for a good DTM project. Any thoughts on that? Let me toss out a couple elements that I think are helpful to get a project that will be satisfying and that might work for what you try to do. First factor, always good to try to address a pressing need. In the case of Audrey, this was a hospital that needed the toy drive to keep up the morale of their patients. Carol Latoff did a DTM dealing with a meet your match so you could find mentors from other clubs other than your own, something that the district director suggested to her. So there's a lot of projects like that among the 14 DTMs that have been awarded so far to our district under the Pathways program. Other things, selfishly, you might be thinking about doing a DTM to get a greater mastery over a set of skills that the project requires. So example, if you want to develop some fundraising skills, you might do a fundraiser for an organization you care about or a toy drive or some other sorts of drive just to kind of improve some skills, or maybe just do something that will generally improve your leadership skills. Third one that I think is very important is that you have a passion for the project that you're going to do. Part of doing a DTM is fun, but like most of the things that are worthwhile, a portion of it is kind of drudgery, the kind of basic blocking and tackling that you have to do to get any project done. And if as you're doing it, you can say to yourself, I think this is important, I think this is a good thing to do, it's much easier to get through the periods of time when the things you're doing are not the most scintillating things in the world. Next is defining the scope of the project properly. It's easy to come up with a grand idea, and a grand idea can keep expanding. I'm hoping Jay will mention this a little bit later. As he started his project, I spoke to him about it, and he kept telling me about all the things you can add on to make it better and better. But you also want to try to bound it as you put your plan together so it's something you can actually get done in a reasonable period of time and collect credit for your project, and ultimately to get your DTM awarded, having this item checked off. And the final thing to remember is it's important not to view this as a one-person show. You're not executing a project by yourself. You're executing a project with a team. So it's important to think about, how am I going to work in the leadership component? Are there people I'm going to be able to delegate to? Are there people who are going to help me create content for the project? These are, I think, what I would think are the 5 key elements, but I'm sure there's others that other people are thinking about. So Jay and Audrey, you want to tell me what I missed on that list, or things you guys would add?
No, you summed it up really well. I am happy to share some examples of what ended up happening with my project. In line with what you just suggested, David, one of the points you made was the scope creep could happen, right? Like you set out to doing certain things and the project might end up being something much, much bigger than what it needs to be or what you originally envisioned. So that's where I came up with what is the commit goal and what is the stretch goal. And I was able to hit the commit goal and parts of what my stretch goal was, but it was like, sky's the limit kind of a thing. I could do more and more, so I had to draw a line somewhere.
I appreciate that reminder, Jay. I remember you said that, and it slipped my mind. But I always think about when I lay something out, I have a project and I figure this is the objective, and I think of the objective as being a space. And I think Jay correctly brings in the concept of don't thinking of a goal as a dot, as a single point. Think of it as a region that you want to try to land somewhere in the region. at least this much. If I get to this point, I can fully declare victory. But if I end up somewhere within that region, I should be satisfied with it. I think it's kind of a good way to think about projects, not just DTM projects, but anything else as well. Audrey, I saw you had your hand up as well.
Don't underestimate the project. I am a planner. But you name it, I did every single thing wrong with my DTM project. I didn't think it through properly. Think it through. I did a toy drive in October, November. Bad choice. Bad choice. You don't do it near the holidays. Again, if I did it again, I would think of a different month, probably maybe the summer. But think it through, plan it through, come up with things. You name it, I hit every single obstacle and use your team. I called my team together and I said, we have no choice. It's been a month. What can we do? What am I doing wrong? We pulled our heads together and we threw stuff up on the wall and we brainstormed. And within a month, the toys were coming in. Use your team, think, plan, and when you hit an obstacle, don't give up. Just keep going. And to me, it was fun. I learned a lot. I knew nothing about toy drives. I learned a lot. It was fun, but use your team and use their knowledge and talk it up.
You know, it's so Audrey tells that story now, it feels like kind of a humorous story, a toy drive without any toys. I'm guessing it wasn't so humorous at the point it hit. And yeah, what do you do if you're doing a project and a key element just falls out of place? You have to decide, have I thought it through properly? Is there something I can do? Is there an adjustment I can make, which Audrey did apparently successfully in her case? Other times, you might need to go back to the drawing board and a particular aspect of your project no longer makes sense. So you might want to adjust the scope or change your focus a little bit. But the point, I think, is one of keeping an open mind and always being flexible. At a certain point, tenacity is a good thing. And in Audrey's case, where it worked out, her tenacity worked and it made it work for this cause. And I see Rudy drop back 20 in front. You can do that as well. In other cases, you have to understand what the difference is between tenacity and stubbornness. So you have to kind of understand is, am I really going to make this project work, or do I really need to make some significant changes? And kind of knowing the difference between, do I just need to push it a little harder, or do I need to think about doing something differently altogether? Anybody? Oh, sorry.
Can
go
I
ahead.
add something?
Yeah.
I picked this project because my goddaughter, when she was 3, got hit by a car and was thrown in the air 15 feet. They had to airlift her, and Children's Hospital in Providence saved her life. And I wanted to give back to this hospital. And when I was hitting those obstacles, I said, I'm doing this for my goddaughter. And I found a way and I worked, and I was so passionate and wanted to give back to this hospital. That's why I picked this project. And that's why I just kept knocking down those obstacles, because in my mind, I had to do this for her.
Yeah, so this goes to the item I listed about having passion for what you do. And particularly in Audrey's case, it's just such a perfect example. There was a very good reason for her to give up early on when it wasn't succeeding. And perhaps if she had cared less about it, who knows? So passion sometimes is the thing that you need to drive the project to completion. Any other thoughts from the group on this subject about how to think about a project, or anybody have any questions about a project that they might like to do, but they aren't quite sure? And I see Rudy has his hand up.
Thanks, David. Here's the thing. Many years ago, my son, God rest his soul, because he's gone now, but he was a ventilator-dependent quadriplegic. Audrey mentions don't underestimate or don't overestimate maybe what your project might be. A passion in my life has always been that if I were to win that, $1.5 billion lottery, for example, was to build what we'd call the Christopher home, which basically would be a housing unit with medical facilities on site for ventilated dependent quadriplegics in the Boston area. Because there is no place for these people. There is no place. They have to live in a facility and they're strangulated by what they don't have access to, such as just getting out and doing something like going to the movies. It's not as simple as it sounds, and it's never that simple. So I'm just wondering, this would be a project I would think about doing, but I'm just kind of like overwhelmed with how big this project would have to be and how long it would have to go on, and where do I even start something that's that huge?
So I like that example because, oh, I'm sorry, before I give that, I'm going to give the floor to our soon-to-be Vice President of all of Toastmasters, Stefano.
Oh, you could have went with him. I just had another question.
Okay, no, let me take your question, then we'll go back.
Oh, sure. So, I'll lower the hand there. My question was back in the day when, I was much younger, we would have a lot of people that would do their DTM project, and they would do it to see if they could make their area distinguished or make their division distinguished. So it was connected to the work they were doing within Toastmasters, which was good. It was very convenient. But is that something that is still looked at for? Because the examples that I'm hearing are not just outside of Toastmasters, they're really even outside of what people's specialties are. So has that changed in the intervening years?
So the description of the DTM has changed since we went to Pathways. Of the 14 DTMs that we have completed so far in the district, I'm guessing it was about half, maybe 6 to 8, something like that, were things for the district. So it's a split. So that's still legitimate. In terms of becoming a distinguished district, I guess the first thing is there's no arbiter over what constitutes an acceptable DTM project or not, other than the vice president of education of each club. There's no committee passing on it. It doesn't go to the Fab Four to decide if they think this is a credit-worthy project or not. So, all sorts of things can become projects. If you would ask my opinion, if it's something that you're basically told how to do and you're just kind of following in a path and executing against somebody else's plan, I would think it doesn't really count, because when you look at the description of the project, it talks about planning and executing. So coming up with something original, or maybe something that already exists, but putting a different twist on it. If Trevor were here, he would talk about how he modified some of the stuff for officer training to work in a COVID environment. Some of the things were no longer the same. So in one sense, he was treading on old ground. On the other hand, he had to modify something that was made for a live session into something made for a virtual session. So that certainly had the element of originality that brought it out. But the particular example you gave, unless there was something special that person was doing to make it a distinguished area or division, at least in my opinion. So minority of one, at least told us of you. That's where I would draw the line. I wanted to go back to Trevor's description. So raising $1.5 billion, although I have no doubts that Rudy could do it if he tried, because he's a pretty determined guy and he has a lot of skills. It sounds to me like that's something, at least I wouldn't try to execute as a project, but I might think about executing the first couple steps. So what in that project, if that's what you want your ultimate goal to be, what might be realistic? So certainly something around raising awareness of the issue, doing publicity around that. I can imagine something like that. I can imagine some small fundraisers that, even though might just be a drop in the bucket relative to $1.5 billion, it's at least a proof of concept that there's something important here that people care about, that matters to a lot of people. And that might be enough to attract a foundation or a major donor or whatever. So, there's a saying about how do you eat an elephant, one spoonful at a time. Something similar with these projects. There's a number of sub-projects involved to getting to $1.5 billion in funding. And, certainly thinking about what some of those sub-projects could be that would be doable, that's a sensible scope. I saw it. I'm trying to see who else I have for hands. Jay, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to comment on both those questions, but you're rightfully, in the right seat as the moderator. You pretty much had everything I had to say for Rudy, right? Like breaking the larger goal to like something that's meaningful and something that Rudy can accomplish right away. You talked about awareness. I was having GoFundMe kind of a page in mind. You talked about fundraiser, getting some X number of hits on the page, X number of hits on the videos that Rudy may put together. Also, geographically spreading out, making sure that people from every continent or every state is able to access this information. So you could pretty much get an idea that there is word spreading around this, right? That could be a small, meaningful, but yet very important step that you could take when you look at the overall picture. And I was just going to add one other comment on Stefano's question as well. Great question. Anything we do in life, at least myself, I look at why is it that I'm doing what it is that I'm doing, right? Simon Sinek, one of the motivational speakers, talks about start with the why. And you rightfully started this conversation and this discussion, David, by talking about the pressing need we may have. And the district 2 years ago had a pressing need. And what is it? Well, we were losing members. Member retention and member engagement were two important projects that we were trying to embark on wherever possible. And all of the TLIs and COT trainings back then were looking at member engagement, member retention. So that's kind of something that set me on this path of looking at, okay, what can I do to not only engage with our members existing, but also bring in more members because we were losing members. And so when I realized that there are all of these schools in Boston, and especially, I'm personally involved with this project because I have an eye condition, and I wanted to work with folks that do not have sight, try to bring them Toastmasters, and as a result of all of that, maybe increase our membership. We did. There was one person who's committed to being a member. He's still a member, but a second person showed interest, and kind of that interest waned. 1 or 2 members is not really tilting the needle in our favor, but like they say, small steps, incremental steps first, and so that's the project that I embarked on.
Yeah. I don't need to embarrass Rudy, but I think it's worth mentioning that although he hasn't raised his $1.5 billion yet, I know, Rudy, that you've spoken on this subject to other groups. You've spoken about your experience losing a son, which I'm sure at first was painful. You've gotten more experienced at it. So these are all, not to suggest that that constitutes a DTM project, but these are all steps toward achieving a bigger goal and getting there. So it's not as if you're just treating it as a pipe dream. There are things you are doing even now. I see Kristen Culver has her hand up.
I'm hoping I'm not causing us to tangent, and I'm asking this because I'm probably not the only one in the room who is just teensy bit confused. I did things with legacy program, so I'm still wrapping my brain around how certain acronyms are used now. How is HPL project different than a DTM project? If there is a difference, because I'm feeling a little confused, and I shouldn't be because I'm an officer. So darn it, educate me, please.
All right. So the HPL project relevance in pathways is it's either a required project at level 5, or if it doesn't happen to be a required level 5 project, it's always an elective. And the HPL, I don't have the sheet in front of me with all the detail. I'm sure you can look it up and it tells you what those requirements are. My understanding is it's that they changed the HPL so it's not the same as it used to be when it was a DTM project, but I think the focus on how you do it is different. I believe HPL still has a committee that you work with and you check in with them and they give you feedback. And I suppose you could do that on a DTM project now, but it's not the requirement. Right now it basically, I believe, has just 3 characteristics. You're told to plan and execute a project, and it's supposed to have 3 characteristics. It's supposed to be multifaceted. It's supposed to require you to demonstrate your skills as a leader and as a communicator. And what's the and it's supposed to benefit an organization, either Toastmasters or some other organization. So the benefiting an organization, I don't believe, was an HPL requirement. And I'm sure there's some others, but you can put the two next to each other. My guess is, since the DTM project is kind of the capstone and the HPL no longer has capstone status, the HPL, I'm guessing, is a little bit less involved than it used to be. I see Audrey, who follows this stuff more closely than I do, is nodding her head up and down, which I'll take it to mean I didn't say anything too stupid about the two. But if you want to add a little gloss to that, Audrey.
No, that you hit it right on the head. I have two DTMs, one in the legacy, one in pathways. And yes, my HPL in the legacy was like the DTM project in pathways.
Yep.
But now that we have this capstone project in pathways, the HPL is it's not as big as, when you say HPL, high performance leadership, it's not the way it used to be in the legacy program. So take those old recordings of what an HPL was in the legacy program. It's different in the pathways program.
Thank you. Tim Greenwood has his hand up.
Yeah, well, since Kristen raised it, my question really builds on hers, because I had a similar confusion, and I was at the lessons learned seminar back in December, and I was trying to understand how everything fit. I kind of understood the old way of doing things, and I was trying to understand how it all fit in here. So, is the lessons learned in your DTM project, or is that something else? Or how does all that work? I don't have the big picture. I thought I had a big picture 2 years ago, but not anymore.
Let me give you the 2-minute explanation. If that's not enough, if it's a more detailed question than you're asking, I'm happy to take it offline with you. So there is a lessons learned project, which I believe is a level 5 elective. We basically get a group together to debrief after you do a significant project. So for example, I did that requirement after I ran a division speech contest, getting together with my group that helped me put it together to figure out what we could have done better and so forth. Nothing to do with the DTM. Lessons learned for a DTM is a similar process. It's a pathways lessons learned process. You don't get credit for having done a lessons learned project as a level 5 elective when you do it for a DTM. It's just one of the DTM requirements. But in terms of how you structure that lessons learned, it's basically the same advice that you're given for doing it at level 5. Like most things in the DTM project, if you want to modify the way something is set up in order to make it make more sense for your project. So for example, and it's too bad we don't have Trevor here because he would speak to this. If in connection with doing the 360 that's called for under the Pathways DTM, you just look at that form and go, this is silly, nobody's going to fill it out. And instead you want to say, I'm going to make my own form. These are the things that are most important to me to learn about, are really going to tell me the most. And this is the form somebody will be willing to fill out. That's fine to do. So similar with the lessons learned, if you wanted to do a lessons learned by the book, do it similar to the way that you would do the level 5 elective, then God bless you. If you wanted to make some modifications, fine also. But the lessons learned that you're doing that's tied to your DTM project is not a lessons learned that you could also collect credit for as a level 5 elective. There's no double dipping.
Okay.
That cover your question, or am I missing the?
Yeah, I guess if I dig in further and further, it'll become clearer, and I might get back to you then.
Okay, so my email for anyone who's curious, dlintz@verizon.net. Shoot me a note. We'll set up a time to chat. All right. Any other questions or? So I have for sorry. I had one for Jay. So Jay, in order to execute your project, you really had to develop a lot of relationships that you didn't already had, or that maybe you just started to have, but you needed to add to it. So what did you do to create relationships with people in the visually impaired community?
Yeah, one of the things that I was lucky with was colleagues and Jesse Welty were both picked by the National Federation for the Blind, where there was an opportunity for Toastmasters to work with them, set up a booth at their annual conference and stuff like that. So that was the first break that I got where I was able to actually partner with quite a few of them. And that's when I realized that there were also members already existing within District 31 that had lost sight. So I also had the opportunity to talk to them, get their perspective. All of this helped me in realizing that there were quite a few mailing lists of the alums of graduates from the Carroll School for the Blind. So I started calling all of them, and then I realized that I could actually build some flyers with Braille and stuff like that, which is when I started working with the Perkins School. So it all, like, you know, just like a spark could get ignited and it could cause a fire, it was just a handful of contacts. I kind of embarked on just building that further, and I was able to run a demo meeting for them eventually, which is what I tried to end with as part of my committed goal, David.
Right. So I'm guessing having a sales background didn't hurt.
It definitely did not hurt. Yeah. Yeah. When they say no is when a sales guy's job starts. So when people were giving me, Heisman's, that's when, like, yeah, you roll the sleeves and like, hey, you really want to listen to what I have to offer, because this is a win-win situation for both us as well as them.
Yeah. So I think that's an important point. There's different sorts of obstacles you can encounter if you need to get the cooperation of others, and some of the people you want aren't giving you the cooperation you need. That's an obstacle to overcome. If you're not able to collect the toys that you want to collect, that's an obstacle to overcome. So one thing is to go in with a mindset that, it's not an obstacle, it's just a deferred opportunity. And not that you always try to surmount every obstacle. At a certain point, you might just decide this project doesn't make sense, and that's certainly a reasonable conclusion. But to just have a mindset going in that an obstacle is not a tragedy for you, it's just part of the process, and you should expect that obstacles will come up. Before we ring off, I have a two-part question I'm going to start with Audrey on this one. The first thing is, what do you wish you knew at the start of your project that you didn't figure out until later? That's part one. And then next, I want you to tell me what the biggest positive is that you took away from doing your project.
I didn't know anything about toy drives. And that's one of the reasons why I picked this project, because I wanted to do something to challenge myself, to learn about me, to grow as a person. And when no one was giving me toys, I stopped and I sat back, met with my group, and they said, your selling point is your story, why you're doing this. Toy drives are all over the place, but tell your story about why you're doing this. And when I started visiting clubs and talking to people, the toys just started coming in. And that's when my smile came on my face, and I'm like, oh, I'm doing it. I guess I'm doing it. Toys are coming in. I guess I learned I had to pull at their heartstrings, which I really didn't want to do. But they said, just tell your story and the toys will come. Build it and it will come. And that's what I did. And the second part was?
I was asking what the biggest positive was for you. And
driving up to the hospital.
I was going to take one thing away. You can't talk about your goddaughter. I'm going to ask, what was the biggest positive personally in terms of the skill that you built, or in terms of some benefit, the personal benefit that you got from this?
It gave me such a thrill to put all the toys in my SUV, and they barely fit. Driving to the hospital, meeting the kids, and unloading the toys, and seeing all the kids say thank you, and seeing the administration of the hospital thank me. That to me was all those sleepless nights of all those meetings and talking and getting the toys and driving hours. I will go to your house to get the toys, driving 2 hours from my house to picking up a small bag of toys, but I got that small bag of toys. That's one more kid that will be happy. And that was my wow. That's what made me happy. And that's what made me said, I did this. And it wasn't for me, it was for the kids, it was for the hospital.
Perfect, well said. One of the things that's telling in the story about the way that you collect money by pulling at the heartstrings, this is something that was knowable by some people, even if not by you, at the beginning of the project. And I think it just raises the point that if you're going to do a project on any topic, talk to whoever you can find out who is an expert on the project. And the definition of expert is somebody who knows a little bit more than you. Mary Ann, what's your question? You're on mute, Mary Ann.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I'm just wondering about how long is the average project? I mean, you know, is it a 3-month project? Is it a 5-year project? I assume not 5 years, but what's the average length of time for people?
Jay, how long did you work on yours?
I did put in about anything between 3 to 4 months of solid effort, and maybe 1 extra month just closing some of the action items that I picked up during the course of it. So I would say average is 4 months plus or minus 1 month.
For you? Okay. On Audrey, yours?
Mine took me about 4 months to do.
I would guess, if I were to guess, and you have to actually look at the individual project. Well, Trevor must have done his in probably 4 to 6 months, because between when he knew he needed it and he actually had to get the content done, he didn't have a lot more time. So, and I can imagine there were some that might have gone close to a year, but I would guess, if I were to guess the midpoint, I would say 6 months, something like that. Probably a sensible number.
Okay,
What
thank you.
No, my pleasure. What I would encourage everybody to do who's really just kind of in the thinking phase right now, I would encourage you to look at the toolkit on the District 31 website. Listen to some of the interviews. It'll give you some ideas. It'll give you some flavor about what it was like to go through the process. Go through the questionnaires. If there's somebody who sounds interesting to you, or somebody had an interesting project, or somebody who you think would just be good to speak to about it, send them an email. The contact information for everybody who filled out a survey is right in their survey. And as I said, everybody indicated a willingness to connect, some by phone, some just by email, but you can make that connection and actually talk through with somebody what they did and ask whatever questions you have. So, you know, 2 easy resources that's already collected for you, that's just sitting right on the website. I would suggest you take advantage of. We're going to have to wrap up pretty soon. If there aren't other questions, I'm going to ask Jay the same questions that I asked Audrey about what do you wish you knew at the start of the project that you didn't figure out until later, and what was your biggest positive?
One of the things that I did not know at the start of the project was the scope and how it kept creeping in. You set out to do one thing and you realize you needed to do something else. And that's when, which came out eventually as part of my lessons learned activity, which we talked about earlier as well, is I should have had a stronger set of folks be part of subcommittee. I didn't have enough volunteers that I recruited. I was pretty much leveraging on 6 to 8 people from within the Watertown Saturday Toastmasters community, and I did not really reach outside that particular club. Maybe I should have had a lot more volunteers is one thing that I realized. Really, the positive that came out of it is to basically hit home the point that communication is not optional to folks that do not have sight. They were pleased to hear that. Obviously, they have so many things that they would want to convey as well, and they would want to improve and enhance their leadership and communication skills as well. So it was nice to actually get some feedback from them where they were like, yeah, this is something that I'd like to explore further. And just that, getting that from them and having them say that on record was something that put a smile on my face, David. So that was clearly a positive. But before I hand control back, there are 2 questions on the chat panel here. If you want, I can read them out for you.
Oh, please, thank you. I haven't been following the chat.
Yeah. One of the questions is from Lavina. What is the eligibility criteria to pick and start working on a DTM project? Of course, we are talking about DTM project here.
Yeah,
This
so
question is, what is the eligibility to even get there?
yeah, so under pathways, you can't get access to the DTM project and put it in your what do they call it? Your list of
Accomplishments.
no, I'm losing the word. You can't get it downloaded as a project the same way you get downloaded.
Yeah, on your path, on your boot
Right.
camp, on
Yeah,
your base camp.
until you
Base
do
camp,
two
sorry.
things. You have to complete a full path and you have to get through level 3 of a second path. Then it doesn't show up automatically. You have to request it from, I think, education within Toastmasters International. But once you satisfy those 2 requirements, you can have the manual. If you want the manual earlier, again, I would suggest going to the toolkit. You can at least see the manual and start to understand what's involved in doing the project. And if you want to do some prep work for it ahead of time, I don't think anybody can stop you. But the official time to start it is after it gets added to your curriculum. I guess they call it after you've requested it, after you complete the path and the 3 levels of another one. And there's another question. What was the other question you saw?
Yeah, the other question is a follow-up from Rudy, where Rudy was wanting to ensure that, because we're talking about a project that has to be related to an organization, the fact that his project is his idea and it's not necessarily an organization. So Rudy was just wondering if that's even qualifying, right? Rudy?
Yeah, it would seem to me, I would think to me that should be the least of the problems. If you were able to actually raise this kind of money, or if you were able to actually get something put in place to make people on ventilators less dependent, I'm sure there's you know better than I do, I'm sure there's an organization that supports people in this position or whatever. So I think being able to tie it to an organization, I think any organization that was involved in this would be delighted to hear that you wanted to do this. And yeah, you can name them as the organization that you were working with.
Right. And Rudy has further added that the project you are referring to gets added in the base camp. I had a slip of tongue when I said boot camp and then base camp, but it is the base camp.
Yeah. That's
Yep.
Good catch.
Yep.
All right, I think we're going to get called back in a minute. I keep getting these warning messages from Jen Tam. Any closing thoughts anyone has or last questions?
David, might I say, you've been an excellent moderator and done a fantastic job.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Rudy. I learned by going to a lot of demo meetings and watching the guy who's the best in the business at it. So I just try to follow in the footsteps of the master.
Thank you. I've learned a lot. I'm new to Toastmasters and I'm only at level 3 of my first pathway, but I've taken on a leadership role at our club. So this has been very informative. Thank you.
So if you've taken on a leadership role in your club, you need to start thinking, even if you're level 3, you need to start thinking about level 5, level 4. And there's a project in level 5, sometimes required, sometimes an elective, called Lead in Any Organization. So you might think about what you're doing as a leader in Toastmasters in your club would satisfy the requirements for that. It's very important as you go through pathways to think strategically as you do things. How do I get credit for doing it? And particularly at the higher levels, there's all sorts of stuff people do for their jobs and just didn't really think of it as tied to Toastmasters. But if it's tied to the requirements of a project, go for it.
Thank
There's
you.
a project, Lead a Virtual Meeting is a project I believe is a level 4 elective in pathways. Do you ever have to lead virtual meetings for work?
I do, yes, all the time.
So that's something to think about to get to your completed first path and get into the second path as well.
Thank you.